Joy.
Okay, Karuna, I will just let Karuna, I'm gonna start letting people in, but as you said, it's ISKCON Cape, ISKCON Africa, so it's gonna take a while.
I saw participants 7. Are we 7 on here? There's 2 that wants to come in. Oh, did you let them in, Shaya?
Yes, I'm letting people in.
Okay, Hare Krishna, dear devotees, most welcome to this most auspicious, wonderful occasion this afternoon. Welcome Meena and Atmadarshini Mataji on Zoom, and then I don't think we're aware of who's watching us on Facebook, but anyway. So today we're going to be covering a most pertinent topic, and the topic is emotions on the path of bhakti. Our speaker for today is Keshava Madhava Prabhu. He's based in Zurich, and he's a professional coach as well as a devotee counselor. But I'm going to be introducing him more extensively later on. But we're first going to just hand over to Keshava Madhava Prabhu and just ask him to lead us in kirtan for a little while. Just before we have kirtan though, I just want to ask everyone to please, while the kirtan is going on, please make sure that you're muted, because call and response doesn't really work over Zoom, over the internet. So please make sure your mic is muted. And then I also just want to request everyone to please keep your videos on as much as you can, just so that, you know, Keshava Madhava Prabhu has a more personal experience. It's not so pleasant from the speaker's point of view when they can't see who they're speaking to. So as much as possible, please keep your video on. And yes, I'm gonna hand it over to Keshava Madhava Prabhu for now, who will be taking it forward with the holy name.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. I hope you can hear me well. And just to be sure, it's like approximately 10 minutes or something, the kirtan.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, yes, if you can lead us in like a short kirtan for about 10 minutes, that would be wonderful.
Okay, thank you. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prasthaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swaminiti Namine Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Bracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Ashriyadeshatarine. Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhar Srivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadada Shivasari Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Ram, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare.
Jai, thank you so much, Keshava Madhava Prabhu, for leading us in Kirtan. That was really lovely and really just set such a nice mood for this really wonderful occasion, because we're going to be touching on a topic that is really, really important, and that is actually not spoken about so much. So yes, it is a wonderful occasion. Thank you so much to everyone who's joining us on Zoom, and welcome to everyone who's also watching on Facebook. So my name is Karuna Avatardas, and I will be hosting the session. I welcome you all also officially just on behalf of ISKCON Cape Town, as this is the ISKCON Cape Town is actually making this session happen. So I'm going to begin just by giving an introduction of our speaker today, Keshava Madhava Prabhu. He was born in 1982 and he's from Germany. He came to Krishna consciousness in the year 2001 at the age of 19, and soon thereafter he joined the International Society of Krishna Consciousness at the Simhashalam farm in Germany. He spent 9 months serving at a preaching center in Vienna, Austria, and he was a brahmachari for 3.5 years after that, meaning that he was a celibate monk fully dedicated to his spiritual practice, and he served in various capacities in different preaching centers in Germany. Now, Keshava Madhava Prabhu is a disciple of His Holiness Kadamba Kanana Swami, and he also had the great fortune of being Maharaj's personal servant, which also gave him the opportunity of being in India for more than 6 months with Maharaj, which must have been a very enriching experience. And then in 2008, Keshava Madhava Prabhu completed his education as an occupational therapist. Shortly thereafter, he moved to Zurich, Switzerland, and he's been working there in the psychological field ever since. And then in 2011, Prabhu completed his training as a transformational coach with the Sattvatove Institute, which is recognized by the International Coaching Federation, the main body that legitimizes coaching training schools. And he then proceeded to establish his own coaching practice in Zurich. Now, Keshava Madhava Prabhu is an experienced devotee counselor and teacher at the Zurich Temple in Switzerland, and he basically heads up the devotee care and counseling department. So indeed, very qualified to be elucidating this topic of emotions on the path of bhakti. Now, why is this relevant? Because we currently find ourselves within human bodies, and feeling emotions are an inherent part of the human experience. Now, unfortunately, a widespread fallacy exists amongst devotees that in the name of being transcendental, core aspects of a healthy human life may simply be bypassed, such as taking care of the body by doing regular exercise and giving our emotions their due by acknowledging and processing them properly. Feelings are an inescapable part of being human. We have to feel them. They will pretty much involuntarily arise in response to our lived experiences. But feelings are generated and processed within the subtle body. And so our true self as the soul is inherently aloof from this. So in essence, what it really comes down to is that our feelings will always be there and we have to deal with them, but we have the freedom to decide how we will respond to our feelings. And so Keshava Madhava Prabhu is here to teach us how to do so skillfully. And so without further ado, I hand it over to Keshava Madhava Prabhu to elucidate this topic of emotions on the path of bhakti.
Thank you very much, Karuna Avatar Prabhu, for the introduction. You raised already a very essential aspect of the topic, namely that emotions will come, they cannot be avoided. And there is tendency that in the name of spirituality, we think we transcend emotions, while in fact what's happening is they're being cut off, or we can call it being repressed or dealt with in an unhealthy way. So, and I would agree that there's certainly a need that devotees in general, or any spiritual practitioner, takes the time to contemplate the nature of emotions and to also give space to a process that allows to connect in a healthy way with emotions and properly transform them, because what we do in our spiritual life, what we're supposed to do, is to transform that what we call material into that what we call spiritual. And I also want to address the aspect that there can be stereotypical ideas of what is spiritual and what is material, and sometimes very hard lines are being drawn without that it is possible to really explain them or like to make them tangible. And it seems rather often like a concept we have, but not really something we can live up to by making this is spiritual, this is material, and this we should do, this we shouldn't do, and rather like seek the transition period, like what's happening when we call something spiritual, what's happening when we call something material, and enter more into the subtlety of the mind. I also would like to read from 2 verses from the Bhagavad Gita today, because when we speak of emotions, we automatically, of course, speak of the mind, or what we call the psyche, or in the Sanskrit, the manas, that in which we experience what we call emotions. And it is said that the central tool of our yoga practice is the mind. If we read the 6th chapter of the Bhagavad Gita, which is called Dhyana Yoga, also often we probably refer to it as Ashtanga Yoga, since the process of Ashtanga is being mentioned, is very much elaborating and highlighting on the role of the mind in spiritual practice. And also Srila Prabhupada sums it up saying, actually, essentially, the yoga means properly dealing with the mind, because he's that what matters, or it is that what matters the most. And most of you, I assume, are familiar with the basic categorization of what manas is doing in our life, or like in our mind. We have the aspects of thinking, feeling, and willing, that we say these things happen within the mind, and also perhaps mainly because of the mind. And of course, there are more aspects to it. There's some in Ayurveda, there's teachings of the external, internal mind, or we have in Western psychology, the consciousness, the subconscious, and the unconscious, or different layers of the mind. The mind is not so easily accessible to us as we might think sometimes. We would say, just control yourself, just give up this or give up that. And we refer to the willpower, the willing of the mind, though often we find ourselves that our will is either not strong enough, or we're not even willing what we're supposed to will. So then we must ask, okay, what do I do with that? So I would start with reading from the Bhagavad Gita from chapter 6, text number 7 is one of my favorite shlokas. And then also later read another verse that I find very essential in regards to the mind and emotions within spiritual practice. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. In text 7 it is said, Chitatmana prashantasya param atma samahitaha shitoshna shukadukeshu tathama panamanayo. For one who has conquered the mind, the supersoul is already reached, for he has attained tranquility. To such a man, happiness and distress, heat and cold, honor and dishonor are all the same. And that's just a short purport. I'm going to read it. Actually, every living entity is intended to abide by the dictation of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is seated in everyone's heart as Paramatma. When the mind is misled by the external illusory energy, one becomes entangled in material activities. Therefore, as soon as one's mind is controlled through one of the yoga systems, one should be considered to have already reached the destination. One has to abide by superior dictation. When one's mind is fixed on the superior nature, he has no alternative but to follow the dictation of the Supreme. The mind must admit some superior dictation and follow it. The effect of controlling the mind is that one automatically follows the dictation of the Paramatma or Supersoul, because this transcendental position is at once achieved by one who is in Krishna consciousness. The devotee of the Lord is unaffected by the dualities of material existence, namely distress and happiness, cold and heat. This state is practical samadhi or absorption in the Supreme. So two things to this verse I would like to highlight. One is that whole aspect of conquering the mind and the result of it, that Prabhupada says our mind is never simply ours. And if you speak of mind control, we actually speaking of directing the mind toward one of the two possible options, material nature and Krishna, so to speak. And the more we manage to direct our mind to one of the two, particularly the Paramatma feature or Krishna, the more we will be automatically guided by Krishna, by the super soul, and also one will leave behind that what we call material emotions. He said happiness and distress. But in order to enter that more concretely, we must of course first speak a bit about how do emotions come about, or like how to understand them and their dynamic. I assume I will, or like the plan I had is to take at least another 10-15 minutes to set, so to say, the basics of the contents, and that we then can, if desired, already bring in questions that would help me to simply keep the focus and like build up certain basis. Is that
Sure,
okay?
Prabhu. Yes, absolutely.
Yeah. So the word emotion, we can look at it as motion within it. And it is literally that what moves us within our mind. We can look at ourselves in our daily lives, and we sometimes use the phrase also, I feel moved to do this or moved to that. I'm moved to like that person, or I'm moved to dislike that person. And emotions are these things, these experiences within the mind that give us a sense of the world around us, how we relate to the world around us. And I work in the psychiatric field, and I deal with people who experience what is called depression or clinical depression on different levels. And one symptom of it is that they feel or say emotionless. Though looking more closer, it means there's absence of positive emotions, but there are certainly emotions like sadness, or depression itself is an emotional state, which means you feel put down or pressed down. Emptiness is also a feeling, and there's incapacity to experience positive emotions. And in a sense, yeah, we cannot not feel. Even if we do feel, we don't feel, it is a feeling in itself. Even if we feel emptiness, it is a state, it is an emotion, something that moves us to look at the world at a certain way. But of course, we can feel also disconnected from the emotions that we wish to have, or like we think they should be there in human life. And perhaps you have made the experience that you felt somewhat depressive in either in longer periods of your life, short periods of your life. And most likely you will have made the experience that you don't feel moved to act much. Because the thing is, if you don't, sometimes you also ask someone who's not inspired, like, or would you come to join the kirtan? Would you like to do this with us, or like do whatever? And this person, no, I don't feel like it. It's a phrase we often use. I don't feel like it. So that means the emotion that would give me the drive to do what I want to do or should do isn't there. So without the emotion, I have a hard time to act. So here we can see emotions are a very essential feature in our capacity to act. You know, also what we call in spiritual life inspiration or enthusiasm. It's a form of emotion that we need. If I don't feel enthusiastic, means somewhat thrilled or joyful, or to be feeling some interest, then I will not be able even to act, because my mind is not moving me. He's maybe standing still, or like being perhaps even, sometimes the mind can be paralyzed. So from this we can understand that emotions are a critical factor in our capacity to act, and simply cutting off emotions will not help us to act on a higher platform, even if we speak of acting in Krishna consciousness, by simply thinking, oh yeah, I actually feel, one of the big topics is person feels so-called lusty desires, inclinations to enjoy this or that, or feels perhaps even very critical or skeptical about stuff, but doesn't dare to express. And then these things are being cut off perhaps, or repressed. And then people do more or less, but they do not really thrive in what they do. They survive in what they do. They kind of be there. And perhaps you have in your own life experiences where you sense, actually, I don't feel really into it, or like I struggle with a certain state of emotions. So one model I would like to suggest to make emotions more tangible, also for the discussion, is that emotions are a mirror. We have this concept to some degree also in our Vaishnava philosophy, that we say the mind is a mirror. It can show us who we are, or like even if we are not situated in transcendence, the mirror function is there, and whatever is on the mirror is being reflected back. So if our mind is influenced by what we call material nature, we see ourselves in terms of material nature, in terms of our gender or nationality, or our role or status in the society. So this is what the mind reflects back to us, because that is what he's being what is shown to him, or what he is connected with. In a higher sense, of course, the mind can reflect our true self, which will be explained also later in the 6th chapter. And these reflections go along with feelings. What if I can be pleased with what I see in myself and feel comfortable and good with my so-called self, and I can feel the other way around. I can feel very dissatisfied or sad or frustrated with who I apparently am on a material platform. And emotions are said to mirror particularly the relationship we have with on 3 levels. First is the relationship we have with ourselves, and this is a very crucial one that we might want to put some emphasis to in this whole session. And the second is my relationship with others. How do I relate to, how am I in exchange with other people that are maybe close to me, or like people that I just deal with every day and then might not be so close to me. But then also we have a relationship with things. Like with your clothing, you all dress a certain way. It's called, nowadays, there's a lot of emphasis on style. You are as what you dress, you know. And also with, in our devotee communities, we have certain ideas, like certain tendencies to particularly identify, like have a relationship with the external dress, because it reflects also on ashram, reflects to a particular standing I have either in society or in life. So, and it is said, the emotions we feel, they mirror the relationship we have with these three things: ourselves, with others, and with things that we use. And these are, the feelings are, someone is, I guess, the feelings, they have practically two core messages, and they relate to needs we have in this relationship. My needs on a physical or mental level can be fulfilled, and I can feel happy, satisfied, joyful, inspired. And this is one way the feelings can go. And the feeling shows me, actually in this relationship, I'm doing well, or I'm being, or I ought to say, I have the empowerment to develop myself. I feel understood. I feel cared for, and therefore I feel good, loved, affectionate, or whatever. So we have a range of emotions there. And then can be the other way around. Needs might not be met based on the body and the mind. And perhaps I feel sad, or I feel frustrated, angry, perhaps up to being very hateful or bitter or cynical. So there can be a whole range of what I can feel based on the given relationship I have with myself, with others, and with things. And this is the basic model. And here, of course, we have the material platform. It was said before, the material nature demands certain things that we identify as needs, right? If I feel hungry, it's a feeling. I feel thirsty, I feel sleepy. And it shows me, oh, there's a need now to eat or to sleep. Same is then also what we have to, if I feel threatened in some way, I feel anxious, I think there's need to become in some way or other defensive, or to do something about it. Or like then the same with the four core tendencies, the so-called lusty desire, this desire for intimacy and for sexual exchange. These also feelings are there, like saying, okay, now there's need to get close to, get intimate with another person in my life. So, and these are some how to say, informations that shall give us a bit more of a sense what are emotions connected to, because people sometimes have difficulties to identify, why do I feel what I feel? And am I supposed to feel what I feel? And in my experience, also, it's the mind, this is described in psychology, we have so-called defense mechanisms. That means if an emotion is there, but it is socially perhaps not acceptable, or I myself have issues because I don't want to see myself as perhaps an angry person. Spiritual people are very peaceful. They're detached. They're compassionate to everyone. They're not angry. So, but what happens if I sense that I become perhaps very resentful or angry, or simply disinterested in some person that is like connected with me in my either community or family? I can either express it and look bad perhaps, or like whatever could be the response, or I can also subconsciously decide to not let that feeling be present. And then we have a so-called defense. We fend off a certain emotion that is there based on the understanding it's not right to feel that. It's not proper to feel that. We might not even have, we might not be at a point of really understanding what's going on, but we just sense it's bad or it's good. So, and then another emotion can can be employed by the mind to fend off the emotion that I do not want to be there. And I mentioned before, I work with people who have depressions, and many times they also suffer from strong anxiety, being very fearful. Perhaps you also know that we recently spoke on one Zoom seminar. It was about the lockdown situation and how anxiety is increased out of different reasons. But looking closer, it is often revealed that actually the anxiety or fear is not the actual issue or not the actual emotion to be looked at. I often ask, what is your relationship with aggression, with anger? And then mostly, I would even how to say, claim to say it's always people with intense anxiety issues on the core mostly tend to have strong anger issues. Actually, behind or beneath the anxiety, there's a lot of repressed anger. But anger is not allowed, and anger is the outgoing, the destructive principle, the confrontive principle. And in order to check it or like not allow it, fear is a good emotion because fear is the more closing, withdrawing, passive or principle, and it must be bigger than the anger. So then we have a person who feels a lot of anxiety and thinks my issue is I'm too anxious. Of course, I'm not saying it should not be a stereotype. Everyone who feels fearful is actually angry. I'm not saying that. I'm just saying that is often in the case of in the clinical field that is like this. So that actually it's about looking at what is my relationship with anger. So this I mentioned in order to already point out that emotions are not so simple, because sometimes we tend to look simplistically on emotions, but there's more complexity to it. So that also in discussion we can enter a bit maybe deeper into the mind's capacity to handle emotions. All right. So perhaps it's good at that point of the session to open up for some comments or questions that might be there so far.
Thank you, Keshava Madhava Prabhu. Some very enlightening points. I have a few things that I can ask personally. There hasn't been any questions in the chat yet, and as far as I understand, no questions from Facebook. So we just want to stimulate the conversation, dear devotees. If you have any questions, please put them forward. I have one question just in regards with something that you just said, Prabhu, which is that under anxiety, there's actually a deep sense of anger. But my question is, anger is said to be a secondary emotion, and that there's usually something which is underneath anger itself, and that anger is an expression of that, so maybe intense disappointment or hurt or whatever it may be. So if anger is under the anxiety, what is under the anger?
Well, as you already now pointed out, that one option could be that there is a sense of course, mostly there's a sense of hurt, and hurt can come from disappointment. And then we enter the whole realm of values and values that we have, where we feel these are things these are how things should be done, like loyalty, for example, trust, support, in devotion, in devotee communities, expectations are being created based on certain values, social values that be there, and also in relationships. For example, you might have that, a devotee is described, or the Vaishnava, as being very kind, compassionate, tolerant, and based on that, I also create an expectation, or the value is there, like, okay, compassionate, or like being non-violent. This is how a Vaishnava should be, and perhaps I open myself up to inquire from some devotee, render service, or being part of it. But then I experienced this person being very harsh to me, or like behaving in a way that seems to very contradict, or this person is not simply not living up to the actual value. And then naturally anger is there coming from the disappointment or like the hurt I experienced because there's a how to say the value that I'm expecting is not being, how to say, the person does not live up to it. And so beneath anger there can be such things like the value, but it's simply what is a more powerful thing we have also when we deal with not just depression anyway, sense of injustice. Something happens to me that might be a loss where you might wonder a bit, but how can you be angry at the person? But it's happening. A person dies. At the moment you wouldn't be, first of all, expecting, what to speak of being prepared for it. So many things are open. It just happens to you simply out of your control. And what people often experience is intense anger at that person. Why did this person die now? Sounds kind of, I mean, funny not, but but it sounds like a bit irrational. But how can you? This person himself could not decide when to die necessarily.
Yes. It's kind of like, we also understand from the Vedic perspective that there are different kinds of pain or different kinds of unpleasant experiences in this world, and pain inflicted by others or by natural causes are largely so much out of our control, and therefore I think people can be much more easily bewildered by these experiences. But I just want to, there are some questions in the chat which I'll bring up in just a moment, but just in response to what you just said, that the most challenging situation usually is where someone is actually someone actually has justified anger, like when they're in a situation which is truly seemingly unjust from an external point of view. And I'm just reminded of Viktor Frankl in the concentration camps, who survived the Holocaust for 3 years. And some of us may be familiar with this most quintessential realization that he had in that circumstance, that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of, even if people inflict pain and are genuinely malevolent towards us, he realized that we still ultimately have this freedom to decide how we will respond. Now, this is obviously a very, very high level of consciousness, to be able to be completely transcendental to whatever happens to you, regardless of how unfair it may be. So I'm wondering, Prabhu, if you perhaps just have some advice to how we may become more transcendental, in the sense that we develop our capacity to even overcome justified
Anger.
anger. Yeah.
Yes, certainly the question arises, like how can we be above these unpleasant emotions like this anger you mentioned? I would start, like also what I do when I support people with coaching and counseling. The principle I apply is be where you are at for now, because it will not work that you jump to transcendence like that, because out of how to say, some sense of obedience to philosophy or shastra, or like because I should. My understanding is the way to truly go there is to first embrace the condition in which I am now. I had a similar experience. It was still something for me with forgiveness, relating to my father, like, and others have the same kind of thing. Of course, it would be a higher transcendental principle to let go of it and truly forgive. And at the same time, where I'm at, I'm still, my sense of condition is of forgiveness is conditioned. if
Mm.
then, you know,
Mm,
if I
mm,
would sense that he or like what might be she like has regret or see something's done wrong, I would feel rather moved to forgive instead of, no matter how this person acts or like looks at what happened, I still am able to forgive. This would be the higher platform. Still, I I feel not capable to
mm,
simply be there, so I would go first there and, so to say, grant some space to the condition that I have, and more offer a different perspective when I see, okay, where does it lead you, Nico? Can your anger be productive, for example? Can your anger change something, or like, does your anger rather create toxic, uh, how to say, like toxins in your mind? So
mm,
this is the way I would go to not how to say, fight the anger or look at the anger as something not supposed to be there, but rather first of all explore it a bit.
mm,
What in detail is it? What is it that upsets you so much, or what do you feel you cannot let go of it? So give some space, and then often naturally, if I can explore a bit more the feeling and look at it a bit more holistically and closely, and if I'm a choice, not that I'm supposed to, I should, because someone says, then it's more easy and it's more powerful
mm.
to let go of an emotion like anger or resentment.
Right, right. So it's really about accepting that the anger is there, accepting that whatever emotion is there, to acknowledge it fully, and to really like look at it square in the face, you know, and then to try to analyze it from different angles and see what role it may actually play for our betterment at the end of the day. So there's one question which came up here from Simon, and he's asking, what is the role of the ego in emotions?
Thank you, Simon. Um, the answer depends a bit on what concept of or model one has of ego. Um, in the modern psychology, as far as I understood, for example, it is the ego is counted also one of the essential values one has. It's literally the sense of self we have, and how much value do we give to that sense of self. And ego in the Sankhya philosophy, or in the Vaishnava scriptures, is rather a principle of identification. It's a very subtle sense within us that tells us you are that. And because you are that uh, thing, this particular type of body, you are, for example, entitled to this, or you deserve that. Or when something happens to you like this is wrong, or this is right. So along with the identity we accept through the ahankara or false ego, um, then we develop certain states of emotion. We could be very proud, for example, of the self we got in terms of body, either gender, race, status, capacity, abilities. And I understand the ego not so much as a feeling in itself, but rather as a concept that we carry in our mind that generates feelings. That, uh, for example, um, you might be born as a person, let's say as a king is often a good example, or like some powerful politician, and you're being raised in a certain circles, you're going to particular schools, have particular things. So naturally, your ego adopts a sense of entitlement, which is way larger than someone who grows up in poverty, or who's being brought up by people who emphasize meekness, humility, being a rather simple. So the ego is a reflection of how do I see myself in terms of my material identity. So the spiritualist has the task to understand that sense of self as an illusion, that is something that diverts me from the true self. It's like confusing of course, external dress with the person who dresses. That would be the false ego, you know. we also have the saying, I don't know if it's in English the same, I try to translate it. Clothings make people. It means according to what you dress, this is how you're being perceived. And similarly, a soul adopts different bodies, and accordingly it's being treated, right? Like the whole, what is now very prominent is also of course, the racist issue. We have the whole movement, like Black Lives Matter, based on some more incidents. I mean, this thing is happening since centuries, decades, but it kind of flames up differently. Or like we have the gender debate. There's so many where there are certain identities created, and some are labeled as maybe more valuable than others or more sophisticated. And this is how the ego manifests in a sense of superiority, inferiority, and the feelings that come along with it. And the Bhagavad Gita is, of course, teaching us, no matter what identity in the material world you have, this is not your true identity, though it's tempting to think that you are that because this is what you experience the most.
Thank you very much, Prabhu. Thank you very much for that elucidation, really, really showing us that essentially the ego pretty much is what we identify with, and because in this material world there are so many things that happen which are out of our control, when things are taken or given, or where something is inflicted upon us, it just creates a sense of disturbance. And so the key is, I guess, from also what you're saying, is to stop our false identification. So Shardia is asking, Hare Krishna Prabhu, you mentioned that we may not want to connect with our feelings and therefore move into a state of disconnection. Why do we have this tendency to want to disconnect from our feelings, and how can we overcome this tendency?
Well, also here the answer is, of course, it's social context. Like, for example, I was raised in a family in which emotions had been dealt with in a very, let's call it, unproductive way. It's more like hiding from emotions and or sometimes indulging negatively in certain emotions. So this is about, if you look at history, like depending where you grew up, in what kind of culture, then you have either more of a understanding of psychological needs and emotional needs and the nature of emotions, and you are accordingly facilitated in your upbringing to handle them more effectively. In other situations, you will be completely, helpless about it. You know, we feel like being thrown into it, and you have no tools, no skills, no understanding to handle that. So it's part of how we are brought up. And also now what is happening in so many places of the world, there's so many traumatization. If a person experiences hurt, and the hurt might be very intense, might be physical hurt by violence, might be emotional hurt by harshness, judgment, rejection, all these kind of things. People, of course, that's what we mentioned before, we naturally feel we must defend ourselves. And the defense is again connected to the ego. The ego has a sense of that's me, and that's what I'm capable of or incapable of. And accordingly, I must maybe defend myself from certain influences. And one thing might be, I have been disappointed in relationships. Maybe I was being cheated in a love relationship. Perhaps friends severely disappointed me, or like betrayed me, and so on, or like parents that deeply disappointed me. And in this negative way, then we tend to be defensive, to close down, to say, no, I don't want to have that experience again. So therefore, I don't open up for the possibility of such experience by not allowing this type of connection. Although I might first of all have also the friendship or the closeness, this might be there, but I'm afraid of what could come also, means disappointment or hurt. So therefore, don't allow I must, so to say, cut off from the thing itself. then standing there being disconnected, but for a reason. Most of the time, the reason, there might be others, but what comes to my mind now is mainly we of course want to avoid hurt. This is natural for the human being. It seeks pleasure and it avoids displeasure or hurt. And what we have in our Vaishnav culture is the concept of Shraddha or faith, that we are urged to put our faith but in proper people, but also put faith in our capacity to create productive relationships, to have faith that we can manage situations differently as we are used to. Because we all have part, of course, in the hurt we experience, if it's with friendships or parents or like lovers, partners, whatever. In all of these relationships, we are not the victims, though we feel like that often. We are to some degree victims, but at the same time, it's also our choices, our way of responding to situations that create ultimately the hurt and frustration we experience. So if we learn to become responsible, this connects to what we spoke before, to also connect to emotions. Might be, for example, I have the habit not to show how I feel about things, or like not show weakness, for example, and pretend to be strong the whole time. Then people will perceive me a certain way, and they might be not able to really accept me when I would at some point show weakness, because the image I projected the whole time is I'm a strong person, I don't need anyone. That could also lead to that people don't connect to me because it seems to me that I seem to them to be kind of aloof or above. So here there's the question of really personal responsibility. How do I choose to respond to situations, to present myself? And also in spiritual practice, I think part of one value we have is truthfulness or authenticity, to be willing to show also weak spots, to be vulnerable, but not like exposing yourself to that you are being hurt, but to own the weakness, to own the shortcomings you might have, and to because one too powerful emotions that anyone wanted to address, perhaps this is the moment where they should be addressed, that also matter, is shame and guilt. Many devotees also are driven by these feelings, shame and guilt, connected also to certain expectations, of course, we have within our Krishna conscious practice. But we can so far see whether this is satisfying the inquiry.
Yeah, that's really wonderful. That's such a wonderful explanation. I also want to encourage the devotees who are asking the questions to, if if Prabhu said something in answer of your question that you find particularly enlightening, please feel free to turn on your microphone and also just join in the conversation. Otherwise, I can simply keep sharing the questions with Prabhu through the chat. Just something, we have two questions that are also still coming up, but just in response to what you just said, Prabhu, how there's a lot of shame and guilt which is being dealt with, especially in devotee communities, because essentially we have very, very high ideals that we are striving for, and it seems that in many cases it's a very widespread situation that devotees find themselves kind of unable to live up to the ideals, and therefore experience these feelings of shame and guilt. So maybe you could just, on this particular topic for now, just expand a little bit about, how devotees can actually go about reconciling their desire for reaching the ultimate ideals, but at the same time, let's say, to be real, without, just kind of like weakly embracing Maya or a lower standard or whatever. So how to find that balance?
Mm-hmm. And we can look at our lives and ask ourselves, one question we ask also in coaching and therapy is, what are what would empower you to do this or that, or to omit this and that. I think this is all a question of empowerment, and empowerment means certain resources you feel you need to have, either within yourself or from others, certain support. And I think one um, very important thing is, if not the most important thing, is um, the well-wishing attitude of others and the trust of others that you are capable to do so. And even if you're not capable to do so, that still you will be acceptable as a person, as a devotee to that person. Because often what makes devotees so afraid to even look at things, what to speak of addressing them with others, is fear of rejection and judgment, or being simply still being helpless, not getting bad advice, that doesn't help them, which doesn't bring empowerment to overcome certain weaknesses or shortcomings. So my experience is also, if I also toward myself, if I have an attitude of whatever happens, however, if you fail or if you succeed, I stand behind you. Uh, I will not reject you. This is empowering. We as what do we long for in our hearts? We want to be loved for like who we are. But if who we are is, in terms of our condition, is not acceptable, we will refrain ourselves from who we are. We will not show really, and we become also dishonest and sometimes out of need. Um, so it requires that we become capable to be understanding, compassionate, which doesn't exclude that we also are being constructive and truthful, straightforward, um, saying what we think when we feel it would be proper now to speak the unpleasant truth, not like how to sell someone short, saying, "Oh yeah, it's all fine. Krishna forgives everything," like a bit like this kind of thing. It's not what I'm suggesting. What I'm saying is, let's first of all create a space where there's trust, and that if I'm in a situation where I help someone, um, I think my duty is to create a space, a safe space in which the person feels free to express and explore, and that I don't judge, but that I try to bring on productive inputs to say, okay, what are the capacities for change or improvement? And in this way, being a supporter instead of a lecturer or a, how to say, conformer, like that. Does it make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. It reminds me of the one of the principles of Carl Rogers, of his humanistic therapy, where he says that one of the first things that we need is unconditional positive regard, and it just speaks to basically having like a culture of acceptance of people, regardless of where they're at. And I think as long as there's sincerity in the heart of the practitioner, then acceptance can also be there. We have a few more questions here. There is one quite pertinent question regarding depression, and it is being asked, how helpful is it for devotees to turn to prescribed medication to deal with depression, and are there alternatives? I think also basically in the case of someone who is really, really severely depressed and who has been struggling with that state of being for a long time, and in desperation kind of turning to medication.
Sure. Sometimes one thing what I do when I coach people in the how to say, out in the world in a professional manner, where it's about payment and stuff, not with devotees, I have a disclaimer that to be signed, that it's not on my competences to give advice on pharmaceuticals. I can just say, of course, my attitude is as much as necessary, as less as possible, because sometimes apparently it is like this, that the mind has to be affected by some biochemical approach in order to not, because also psychotherapy needs a certain minimum stability of the mind. If you want to approach a person in the psychotherapeutic or like coaching way where you can reflect the mind and deal with things, or what to speak of spiritual perspectives like bringing in karma and reincarnation for you with devotees to look at these things, like this requires a minimum of stability and the capacity to digest what you might figure out. There's some people who feel perhaps like massive confrontation is the key. I don't belong to that to that group of people. And if a person, depending on the symptoms, if a person is really so severely depressive, it might be advisable to go to a professional who is authorized to handle also pharmaceutics. But of course, in the first place, I would try to figure out, okay, what is possible without that. As I said also before, in a depression, it is about looking what is the need. One of the questions I often ask is, when I work with people, what is the function of your depression? Or what is the topic in your depression? Because I am convinced that each depression has a particular topic. That means in your life, a certain life circumstance, a period that you are in, might be a spiritual crisis in the first place, can be a crisis of faith. Things happened and you had a certain concept of who Krishna is, what God is, and how things should work based on that. And then life circumstance completely contradicted this concept of yours. And now you're practically completely disempowered and maybe paralyzed emotionally. You feel like nothing makes sense anymore because my whole concept, my whole worldview was being crushed by just what just happened to me. So that would be about, like, of course, in the first place, having people there who care for you and saying, hey, well, yes, let's mourn together. Let's just like be there and give space to whatever, to depending what it is, to cry, or maybe if there's anger, let's go somewhere and you beat up stuff, to give some expression to what you feel, and then gradually give some something, some tool in the hand of the person to somehow to get hold of what's happening within that mind. And then I would also, of course, reflect on to see, what do you think? If it's a person who has chronic depression, then I also would ask, okay, what do you need depression for? At some point, of course, first there must be trust. You cannot just go there and say, oh yeah, I heard you have been depressive for many years, and I heard this one Prabhu was speaking. One should maybe confront the person by challenging the depression. Now I come and say, hey, what do you need depression for? Right? It's more like in the process, if the trust is sufficient, I might ask that, and if I feel the person has enough confidence or trust in me as a helper, I will come and say, it seems to me without depression, there would also be some difficulties. And what would you say on that? Or what would you miss when your depression would be gone? So this would be a different approach to challenge the mind to look at, it's not just a helpless condition I have, but it's maybe something I choose also. No, it might be if I'm too depressive, people expect less from me. I'm helpless, I can't do this and that. So I can get away practically with less responsibility. Could be something. Or I'm too sensitive now, I'm so depressive. So I can't deal with other issues in my life at the moment. So there could be different stuff.
Right. I'm reminded of something that I heard maybe in the past like year or two. Danidhar Swami Maharaj really likes to say that life does not happen to us, it happens for us, ultimately for our benefit. And even when we go through these really heavy, hardcore experiences, to try to, from what you're saying, to try to see what purpose it may actually ultimately serve. And then the medication thing is really a tricky one, and indeed it can perhaps be regarded as a last resort. There's another question from Simon where he's asking, how can we utilize meditation and mindfulness to deal with our emotions? How do we incorporate that in our practice?
In the last few years, when I give also classes on the Bhagavatam, or like in a particular last few years, I myself absorbed in particular aspects of the Srimad Bhagavatam, particularly in the Vishnu Tattva. Depending where you stand in your spiritual life, in the beginning you have certain inspirations that lead you to take up Krishna consciousness as a practice. Perhaps it's some chanting of the mantra, perhaps maybe certain tunes, perhaps kirtan, perhaps it's descriptions of Shastra, perhaps there are deities, or like there's so many, we have such a rich culture. And my conviction is that in order to have a peaceful mind, we must feed the positive feelings we have toward spiritual practice, toward Krishna, and nurture the inspirations, first of all, that are naturally there, but also create circumstances that give space to further inspiration in our spiritual life. And that means it's in the beginning you're being led by elders. They show you how does Krishna consciousness work. And then you have a particular context in your life, where you live, how you live, what is the situation in the country and place where you live. So according to that, you might need different things. And ideally, of course, those Vaishnavas or practitioners who are there can give you helpful guidance and advice how to most effectively practice Krishna consciousness. And by effectively, I mean that you find a way to connect positively with Krishna, with the aspects that make you feel being more and more close to Krishna. It might be a particular murti you feel, or a particular name of Krishna or mantra, or a particular practice of devotional service. And I mean, mindfulness, what is it? Mindfulness means you're being present with what you do. You're conscious. That means in our case, it is what I attempt also when I teach and when I do stuff, to be aware, what are we doing and why are we doing it the way we do it? To understand purpose, to understand meaning. And by having an understanding of the things I do, I can do them more consciously. And then the next step is to check on yourself, what is most important in my life? You can make a list of your priorities and be honest and just write down, what is priority in my life for me? That might be things that I do, that might be things that I still not doing yet, but I think of them as rather being priority. And to list them, and then again, make a conscious choice. What do I want to focus on at that moment, at this moment of my life? And if I want to truly advance spiritually, if I say I want to somehow find ways to enter deeper into spiritual practice, or find peace of mind, or deal with emotions, first of all, make it a priority. We have to be serious about it. This is what also Shastras advise us. Utsahan nishtayate iryat tatat karma pavartanat sangatyagat sato vrite shatpir bhakti prasiddhyati. Rupa Goswami is advising, saying, be enthusiastic. Utsahan. And Srila Prabhupada is translating or like defining Utsahan as endeavor executed with intelligence. It's not just a feeling of, oh yeah, let's do that, but more like making concrete, tangible plans of setting up a spiritual practice and say, okay, today instead of whatever watching Netflix, I go to the evening program, or I join the Sangha, or like this, I take time for reading, or I try to get others on board to chant japa, have a japa walk together, and whatever it might be. But to make things happen, to create circumstance in which you can nurture your spiritual life. Nishchaya Dhairya, confidence and patience. These are two things that also should be there, that we have trust that the process is valid, and that I can apply myself to it, but also everything comes in time. One of my challenges was impatience, and it's still because I had in between always my kind of downs where I thought, well, no, and tempted so much. Where's the spiritual ecstasy? Where's the revelation? When will I see the Paramatma in my heart? And it didn't happen. All right. And then naturally, of course, it always comes back to, okay, but how strong was my spiritual practice? My Sangatyaga Chatovrite means to follow in the footsteps of the great acharyas and devotees. How much do I truly embrace the practice, embrace the path? And this is something that's given to me. That's my responsibility. And advice is only as valuable as the application of advice. Rupa Goswami's Upadeshamrita is the nectar of instruction. And it is practically a book of advising us how to practice spiritual life. And mindfulness means to be aware, what is he saying and how, but also being aware, what is my motivation? What do I truly want? And if I sense, actually I'm a bit in conflict or like not so sincere as I think, to check on that and to really take some time, take an honest introspection and define your spiritual goals with the help of others, of course, ideally. That was some.
Thank you, Prabhu. That was excellent. That was such an amazing expansion on that question. And yeah, I really like how you highlighted proactivity in our spiritual life, and to constantly be following, in one sense, arranging for and following the nectar that sustains us. And in that way, basically just injecting or like filling our lives with the positive higher experience. Here's another question from Sharadia, who is asking, you mentioned that we need to learn how to be vulnerable. How can we be vulnerable without falling into the trap of wallowing in our emotions or oversharing? Very, very, very wonderful question.
Mm-hmm. Again, here, one aspect is the capacity to be. Thank you for this question. It's good to because I had in mind to actually address this shame and guilt a bit more. Vulnerability is, of course, intrinsically connected to the sense of shame. Might be also be guilt at the same time. Often, why we don't share. Because we feel shameful about it. And the word shame is interesting. It's explaining actually a part, that there's a part in us, might be physical, but mostly we speak of the emotional part within our mind, that is vulnerable. That's why I feel ashamed. There's something that can be hurt, or like, which is I myself don't feel so comfortable with what is there. And that's why I feel shameful. Maybe I feel that's not acceptable, or I will be rejected, or it's something, unpleasant. And in the first place, this deals, I mentioned before, the emotions. We have this relationship with ourselves. It's in the first place a matter of taking a particular attitude toward myself, or you then toward yourself, by looking at, what am I rejecting here at the moment? I know there's a part of me that either struggles, suffers, or feels the way it feels. And that you are in the first place the person to be a acceptance giver. Often people we have, sometimes it sounds strange. We often think, no, but others must accept me, then I can accept myself. If I sense others don't, how can I accept myself? There could be an equation. The approach I choose is to, no, in the first place, if you accept yourself, others will also accept yourself. Like with respect, people who don't respect themselves, they often end up in situations where they're not being respected by others as well. Because the message is, I don't either have clear boundaries, or I will not object if something is done wrong to me, or that I will be cheated. So I'm sending the message, I don't respect myself, we don't have to either. Right? So, but if I have a sense of, okay, respecting boundaries, and respecting yourself is different from being puffed up or arrogant. That respecting yourself is about acknowledging that you have also certain limitations, boundaries, needs, and certain values that stand and they can stand, they're allowed to stand, and to claim that. It's called integrity. And so if others violate it or saying, hey, I don't care, they try to violate that, to also stand firm. No, here's my boundary, Prabhu or Mataji, this is my boundary. And till here, not further. There would be respect. And I would suggest, I would always encourage people to do that, and not in the name of humility, allow others to either exploit or step over you, because it's not healthy. And so with shame, it might be similar to allow yourself to be who you are and say, okay, there's something that I don't like. At the same time, I choose to embrace it as well, or I choose to accept this part also. And then you will feel different in relationship when it comes to shared with others, with friends or with family or like your spiritual superior. But of course, it has to involve trust. I think I would not, of course, advise you to share it with just anyone on Facebook or somewhere, but of course with a person that you're close with and you trust enough, that this person is also interested, first of all, in your well-being. That's something, and also capable to keep confidence, right? This is one of the principles also in our counseling we do in Zurich. I mean, it's so clear that in order that you feel open to share or be vulnerable, there must be confidentiality. And this is also what Rupa Goswami, this verse is often used to, revealing your mind in confidence and sharing this way. This means confidentiality, right? This, and often why we don't feel capable for it, because we don't have a culture of confidentiality, of acceptance, of trust. You know, we have a very public culture nowadays, also with social media, like all kinds of people being dragged through the public with all their stuff, like, and it's actually very uncivilized to expose, to have this tendency to expose everyone. I think what I would suggest is like deal with that, which needs to be dealt in a proper framework with those it concerns, and with a proper confidentiality. You know, also when in temple, let's say someone would have an issue, I would not hang a paper in the temple board, oh, this person has such, you know, as this and this issue, no, but saying dealing with those people it concerns, to work with it, and then taking care of it like this, but in a discreet way.
Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you very much for that emphasis on, you know, firstly being real with ourselves about where we're at, and then having a sense of like self-acceptance. But then from that point going on to be very, very discerning, and to have good discretion about, you know, like sharing what we're dealing with in confidential relationships where the other person is truly capable and interested in actually helping us. So in other words, just really keeping our audience in mind. Prabhu, thank you so much. You've shared so much with us today, and you've elucidated such wonderful topics. You know, in this whole realm of dealing with our emotions holistically. We only have 4 minutes left, so I just want to ask whether you have any particular closing thoughts or comments, or any last nuggets of truth that you feel we need to hear before the end of the session.
Yeah, first I intended to go through, I had a bit of this kind of classic lecture format in mind, but this goes always different. I would like to emphasize what is being described in the 6th chapter actually of the Bhagavad Gita, the stage of samadhi, which is characterized by intense spiritual emotions. That we are clear, the point I want to particularly highlight is that actually in spiritual life, even though it seems sometimes not like it, but it's exactly about emotions. It's about feeling feelings that are based on the self or the Atma, whereas the material feelings are more like based on the connection with the body and mind. For example, the Atma, it said, like, there's a beautiful description of the features of the Atma in the Bhagavad Gita by Baladev Vidyabhushana. He's quoting Chandogya Upanishad, saying one should know that Atma is without sin, without aging, without death, without lamentation, which is an emotion also, without hunger, without thirst, whose every desire is truth, and whose every desire is fulfilled. And to look at it, it's about that we develop the capacity to genuinely feel for Krishna, so to speak, to connect to our spirit self and not deny emotions, because our way to transformation is like first starting what is there, like might it be anger, sadness, lust, whatever it might be, starting from there. Oh, and my understanding is only by owning that perverted version of emotions and gradually working with it, we arrive at spiritual emotions. My understanding is not that by kind of trying casting away or cutting off or trying to erase material emotions, then we suddenly some other spiritual emotions pop up. My understanding is these in the core, each emotion has the capacity to be a genuine experience of the Atma, but it has to be purified. For example, we hear that anger should be applauded. Even we say, oh, anger is one of these very interesting emotions that is also mentioned in Act of Instruction. It said also, Vacho vegam, manasa krodha vegam, jiva vegam uttarupashta vegam, etan vegan yuvishahita dhiraha, sarvam apimam pritivim sashishyat. Different urges are mentioned, manasa and krodha, the anger is there. And then is the word dhiraha, when one can tolerate these things. So tolerate means not to cut off, it's to stay with them, in my understanding. You stay with these angers, you can tolerate that they are there and what they do, but you direct them. And Prabhupada says, for example, if Krishna Guru or the Vaishnava is attacked, the devotee should be like fire, expressing anger. Like the same, you might express sadness or you might express joy. And I think this is the way to just find the way when is an emotion, like to it's about a bit also experimenting. I think there's not the formula, the way how you do it exactly right at each moment. No, it's about you do it and you make mistakes and you learn by the mistakes. That's something also that can take a lot of pressure from you. First of all, if I tell it to myself, I'm not a pure devotee and I will not just suddenly become it, but I will get better by allowing myself to be in the process and also maybe stumble to do something wrong. Important is that I make the learning experience. So that would be something. And I would suggest some topic that could be discussed in this regard, which I find interesting. We have 2 offenses. We had this discussion also in Zurich that are relating to Vaishnavas. That is said, it is an offense to not feel happy to see a Vaishnava, and it's also an offense to be angry at a Vaishnava. And this is in itself a very, I find a tricky one. So this would just be a topic suggestion that I find intriguing. Thank you very much for having me here. I'm grateful and happy that I can be of some service there and connect to some different people in a different part of the world. And thank you to Shardia Rasa and also Kurunavatar and everyone involved there to make that possible. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Keshava Madhava Prabhu. You've really given us so much. I really deeply appreciate it. And yeah, just on behalf of all the other devotees from ISKCON Cape Town that have been here with us, thank you very much. And I hope that in the near future we can have a follow-up session and perhaps address these 2 very interesting offenses that you've just touched on. So yes, I think we'll close it here. And yeah, much appreciation. Jai.
Hare Krishna Prabhu, I just wanted to say thank you very much. It was a very insightful session, and I'm sure I speak for others when I say I do hope that you will be able to give us some of your time again in the future. I'm aware that Karuna Avatar needs to leave. He's got some next arrangement he needs to tend to. But before we go, I would just like to welcome all the devotees that have been present to just unmute yourselves and just express your appreciation for Keshava Madhava or just greet him before we end the meeting. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Thanks very much.
Hare Krishna, thank
Hare
you.
Krishna. Thank you so much.
Hare Krishna, thank you, Prabhu.
It's good to enjoy Zurich. Bye.
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhu.
All right. Then, Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu. We hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. And yeah, thank you very much. It was really, we got such a big variety of jewels I think we can further contemplate and reflect on.
Yeah, I'm happy to hear that. Thank you.
Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.
Everybody, thanks you for all of those that joined us, and we do hope that you did find it insightful, and you are also welcome to watch the recording again. We will have the recording on ISKCON Cape Town's Facebook page, and we can also send you the Zoom recording link. So if you'd like to listen again, that would also be possible, and we do hope you will join further seminars of ISKCON Cape Town. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna.